Hey folks, back again with another vlog. This is Steven Universe, some episode number or another, but the two episodes are Historical Friction and Friendship. Season 2 continues to fire on all cylinders. Historical Friction was an absolute blast, while also subtly continuing the whole Pearl and Garnet not getting along thing. Because of course Pearl is available for Steven and eager to help him precisely because she's so upset about the bad feeling between her and Garnet. As we see in the next episode, where that really comes to a head. But at the core of it, this is one of those fun little episodes where TV writers get a little meta about how much of their job is constrained by the people controlling the money supply. In this case, Mayor Dewey is demanding conflict-free perfection, resulting in something really boring. I can't shake the suspicion that there's a commentary here on perhaps some people being a bit uncomfortable with the kind of material that Steven Universe touches upon. I know that that's been an issue for the show here and there, that the creators have made statements regarding it here and there. I try to filter out Steven Universe news and commentary and that kind of thing, simply because kind of the point of this project is to go through it episode by episode as a first-time viewer, and that's hard to do if I know things that first-time viewers wouldn't know. I mean, I could fake it, but then I'd be faking it. But nonetheless, things occasionally creep through, and one of them is a quote from Rebecca Sugar that's clearly in response to people criticizing the themes that Steven Universe touches upon. The themes of, having a sexuality that is not recognized or respected by the community around you, of loving in unusual ways, of having unusual kinds of families, of being of mixed heritage, that kind of thing. Things that can be uncomfortable for some viewers because it forces them to confront things about themselves, and that, there's one thing that suits don't want. It's to make people uncomfortable in a way that can't be turned into buy. There's a certain kind of discomfort that makes people spend more money because they're trying to make themselves feel better and they think that acquiring things will do that. This is why all malls everywhere are just a little too brightly lit, and the floors are just a little bit too uncomfortable, and the bench and what seating there is always hard, and there's always annoying music playing, because those are things that make people uncomfortable in what marketing people want is the right way, the way that causes you to spend money. Being forced to confront that your values do not necessarily encompass the entirety of human experience, well, that causes, at best, people to sit at home and think, which is, of course, counterproductive from a capitalist perspective, because if you're sitting at home and thinking, you're not spending money. And it's at its worst, it causes people to write angry letters. And then they're definitely not buying your stuff. So, I can see definitely pushing it back against those constraints, against being compelled to, and being compelled to put in the vote Mayor Dewey message. But there's so much other good stuff here. Pearl's whole thing about conflict is fascinating because, of course, part of why she wanted to fuse with Garnet is that Garnet is this wonderful relationship. We find out in the next episode that Pearl perceives it as being a relationship without conflict, a relationship where everybody gets along, a perfect relationship. And yet she insists on making Dewey less perfect. She talks about historical accuracy, which is great because, there is a real tendency to lionize historical figures in absurd ways. I remember one 4th of July, my brother and I were watching some comedy special that was this comedian talking about, like, the real history of what things were really like for, the quote-unquote founding fathers, and about, how sex worked back then, and it was interesting, because I don't think I've ever seen a comedian historian before, but that's exactly what it was. And my sister-in-law got really upset because she felt like this was disrespectful to our founding fathers and our nation on, the holiday that celebrates it. And my brother and I were like, huh? What are you even talking about? Because to us, A, it appeared to be pretty factual, B, it was entertaining, and C, it helped bring historical figures down to the level of human reality. Whereas to her, they needed to be elevated to a godlike level. They needed to be larger than life. They needed to be figures of legend. And, bringing them down to the human level was somehow corrupting them from her perspective. It was a bringing down, whereas to us it was a bringing closer. And I think that's what Mayor Dewey is fearing, but instead the crowd responds and this brings him closer, this brings the founding of our town closer. This helps us understand it as something real, something that has a feeling of being something in this world. Because the thing about legends is that they're kind of on the borders of reality, aren't they? There's a division which doesn't hold with every culture, but in the Northern European cultures, which is where it was come up with, it does generally hold, where folklore kind of breaks down into fairy tales, which are told with the understanding by both teller and audience that this is not true, but it's a tale that's worth hearing anyway, for entertainment, or it contains some educational value in terms of like a moral instruction or that kind of thing. Marchen is the technical term. Then there's, I'm going to skip legends, there's myths, which are true, but they're true stories about gods and heroes and events outside this world or in the primordial dawn of time, events that are so distant from us that the very notion of truth becomes a little bit different from, say, is it true that the baker is sleeping with the butcher's wife? Like, those are different kinds of truth. And then there's legends, which are closer to the kind of truth we know, but they're still larger than life. They're still like these historical figures that are still to some degree remote from us. Even though they exist within our world, they're often where our world comes from, they're still, elevated. They're larger than life. They're special. They're not quite like us. They're a little bit untouchable. And a little bit sacred. Not sacred the way myths are sacred, but sacred the way that flags are sacred. Sacred the way that our borders are sacred. As in, don't violate them or we'll hurt you. Because legends do tend to be kind of nationalistic too, don't they? You know, Beowulf is very British. It's kind of on the border between legend and, you know, just straight up written story, but you get what I mean. Point is, the play is taking Dewey, Dewey the legend and turning him into Dewey the man, and in so doing brings him closer to the audience and makes the audience more appreciative. So there's something there about like the way history is taught in our schools, because there's a conflict that's been going on now for several decades where there's a movement to be more historically accurate in the US about where our country came from, which is to say it was founded entirely on genocide, slavery, and exploitation, which kind of doesn't jive well with the narrative that our country is, a shining city on a hill that is a bastion of freedom. Because it ain't. It's an empire built on slavery and genocide. But, that legend version and the history version, they conflict, they clash. And so this is coming firmly down on the side of history. This is saying, it's better to be real than to tell something that is just kind of feel-good and empty and honestly boring. Not to mention untrue. But again, it's interesting that it's Pearl who tells this story and Pearl who introduces this conflict. Because the idea that conflict is what makes stories interesting, I mean, it's sort of true, but it's also not. Because there are border cases, What is the conflict in an episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood? Yet that's incredibly beloved. We say that a character has to, in the episode they say a character has to struggle, but that's coming from the mailman guy. Is his name Jimmy? I think his name is Jimmy. I'm going to call him Jimmy on the assumption that his name is Jimmy, but the mailman guy who's an actor. It's coming from him, and he's been pretty thoroughly established as somebody who gets carried away and exaggerates and doesn't really know what he's talking about. So when he says that, everything comes from struggle, well, not necessarily. Yes, there is great art to be found in struggle. There are fascinating characters to be found within struggle. But again, exactly what makes Garnet interesting is how balanced she is, how at peace with herself she is, how she does not appear to struggle. And in the next episode where we see her struggle, and we see her divided against herself, it's wrong, and it disrupts things, and we want her to come back together and be her again. Did I say next episode? I meant the previous episode, Keystone Motel. So we've already seen an episode where we see that that's not necessarily true. That's an overstatement. But of course Pearl is saying that it is, because Pearl is in the middle of this conflict, and she wants to see somebody overcome struggle. She wants to see someone struggle and keep going and get through it. And that's what she writes into the play, because keep in mind, most of that play is written by her. So she writes someone who perseveres and pushes through and never gives up and just tries and tries and tries until they succeed, which is great on paper, but leads us directly into friendship. Before I get there, though, I just want to say I absolutely love the scenes of Pearl as Stephen's, doting parent in the audience. Those were great. Those were perfect. Those were wonderful. I also liked, because I do remember Dewey calling her, I think he called her the hot one. And I liked that he like sat next to her and was kind of trying to impress her, and she was just like, yeah, I'm moving to another row. Beautiful. Not quite as amazing as Garnet's shutdown of character I'm choosing to think is named Jimmy, but A+ nonetheless. You know, Garnet's was like an A+++, but whatever. Anyway, the next episode, Friendship. Here we see what, you know, struggle and always try to drive through leads to, which, you know, as the saying goes, if at first you don't succeed, try again. Then quit, because there's no point being a bloody idiot about it. You know, if you fail that many times, maybe you should try a different approach. And that's kind of what happens. Pearl is trying again and again and again to capture Peridot, to impress Garnet, to prove that she, you know, has value, because she's taken the fact that Garnet is angry at her about her, let's face it, horrible deception, and turning that into being about herself. Turning that into being not, I hurt Garnet, but I am a terrible, worthless person. Which is a hazard that every depressed person and everyone who has ever been in any kind of caring role, a friend, a caretaker, a family member with a depressed person, has experienced. Because that's exactly what it does. It is a very self-centered disorder. It, you know, turns everything into a referendum on how terrible you are. And that can be incredibly unproductive and frustrating when somebody is trying to deal with a specific problem that is something that you did, and you're turning it into, I am terrible and should be hated, and that forces them to give up, to either just be mad at you and not be able to talk through the problem, or to be forced to have to now, you know, comfort you and assure you that they don't really think that you're, you know, terrible. It's just this one behavior and so forth. And in the course of that, the behavior never gets addressed. I want to make very clear, this is not something I think is done consciously. It is not something I think that is done in an attempt to avoid addressing the behavior. It is a consequence of the way depression creates very low self-worth. It is a way in which very low self-worth can be frustrating for the people around the person suffering it. And I say this as someone who has been on both sides of that scenario. And has experienced both, and has even done it while recognizing that I'm doing it and being unable to not do it. I am completely sympathetic to everyone in that scenario. The depressed person, the person working with them, everyone. That said, this is what Pearl is doing. She is making it about her worthlessness, so if she can prove her worth, the problem will go away. And it doesn't work like that. Because the problem is that she betrayed Garnet's trust, and regaining trust is hard. And it requires a lot more than just impressing the person, or even a lot of times fixing the problem. It requires proving that you know what you did wrong, understand why it was wrong, have addressed the problem, and won't do it again. And capturing Peridot doesn't prove that at all. And that's the point that Garnet makes. Now, of course, they're thrust into a situation where they're stuck together. Of course, that forces them to talk it through. Of course, they are forced to fuse again in order to get out. But it's still a great conversation between the two of them. I love Garnet's admission that she was torn apart. I love Garnet saying that there are things she looks up to in Pearl. And I love her saying that Pearl has value in herself, that she doesn't need to exist for Rose, for Steven, for anyone, that she can exist for Pearl. That she can be complete in herself. Because that's what Garnet is. Garnet is complete in herself. She is a unified being. She is perfect. Not in the sense of having no flaws, not in the sense of never doubting herself, not in the sense of never being able to improve, but in the sense of being complete. Of knowing who she is and being okay with who she is. And that's not really true of anyone else in the show. Amethyst is not okay with who she is. We've seen that repeatedly. Pearl is really not okay with who she is, and that comes out very strongly in Friendship. Steven is completely okay with who he is. He just hasn't figured out who he is. Whatever it is, he's going to be okay with it, but he's still working out the details. Greg, it's subtle, but here and there we see little hints that he is not, that he's got some serious guilt about Rose not being around anymore, about leaving Steven with the gems. I think probably the way that like his life has gone. Greg is out of all the characters, I think Greg is second only to Garnet in terms of the level to which he's okay with himself, but he's still not quite complete. There's a rose quartz shaped hole in his life. And he's never found anything else to fill it. And that's different. Like, people use that term to talk about mourning, but I'm not talking about mourning. I'm not talking about grief. I'm not saying that he misses her. That's different. You can be complete in yourself and still miss someone who's not around. I mean that he has never healed completely. He has never fully become the post-Rose Quartz Greg. He's still in tension with the Greg who was around when Rose Quartz was. And Connie. Connie has a better idea of who she is than Steven does, but she's also a little bit less self-accepting. Not hugely, but a little. She's definitely got some insecurities. A lot of them to do with her parents. But she's still probably healthier than Amethyst or Pearl. But I like that. I like that the characters are a bit flawed. I was saying before that, conflict being necessary, struggle being necessary is an exaggeration. That doesn't mean that it's never necessary. That doesn't mean that every character should be complete in themselves, It just means we have varied characters. And a really good episode about them. I think that's all I've got for this vlog. Those are all the major points I wanted to hit. This has been a great kind of mini arc within the season. I was honestly really expecting them to catch Peridot at the end of the episode, simply because this arc seemed to line up so well with hunting Peridot. But no, it makes sense that she would escape, because that gives us something to continue following going forward. I'm also interested in her comment that Earth's days are numbered. I don't know if that's villain braggadocio or something's actually coming. I suspect probably the latter, because this series wants to hurt me. Still, 2 really solid episodes in a run of really solid episodes. It's now so long I can't remember what the last non-solid episode was. I am at this point fully sold on this being the best show on TV. I mean, I haven't seen the 3rd season. Maybe the 3rd season is terrible. I doubt it. But, compared to what else was on when these episodes were airing, like, there was some good stuff out there, but no. This tops iZombie. This tops Game of Thrones. It easily tops all the DC TV series. I mean, it's just better than everything else I'm watching. And I'm loving it. So, thanks again to all the Patreon backers who got me watching this series, all the people on YouTube who keep encouraging me to continue with it. You guys are great, and I'm having a blast. Bye.